Certainly the polls in the swing states have been terrible for months now. Bernie makes the point in his interview that the post-debate dip is only about a couple of points so far. But I think that's a very different, I mean, that can be read both ways, that Biden was already doing so poorly even without the kind of mask off moment of the media now finally acknowledging what the public always knew, which was that he is old and that they didn't have confidence in his ability to lead. I mean,
can I just say one thing on that? I think you're totally right. The reason the polls didn't indicate a dramatic jump is because ordinary people saw that, have seen that for a long time.
Yeah.
What was a shift post-debate was the elite finally coming to terms with it.
So that's why it's so ironic that AOC's main hesitation or reservation about the abandoned Biden movement seems to be that from her perspective, the people who are pushing it are in fact elites, that the shift that she has seen is with donors.
When I'm talking to folks in rooms, I hear my donor this, my donor that. Those are the inputs that I am hearing reflected by my colleagues. It's not my voters this, my voters that. Every once in a blue moon. But from what I am hearing, my inputs a lot is donor, donor, donor. 2 million, like there was like some, it's like big donors are saying this, big donors are saying that, big donors, like I could give two damns about what a bunch of rich people think. What I care about is about what the working class thinks and like what a lot of people not on social media think.
That donors, because of their access, ostensibly knew about Biden's condition. We saw a bunch of reporting coming out after the debate about George Clooney and everybody else who was at that big fundraiser about 2 weeks before the debate, having very similar experiences of seeing Biden's decline, but not saying anything about it until it was out in the public. But that they are now sufficiently spooked to say that we're withdrawing. And AOC's instinct is to say, well, if it's the elite donor class that are abandoning Biden, then I'm not going to endorse that. I'm not going to follow them. I don't agree with them. I'm not aligned with them. I understand kind of abstractly, of course you shouldn't do what the elite donor class does, but you also shouldn't have a reactionary perspective where you double down on the guy who was only elected because of the elite, that exact same elite donor class. Harris and Biden, Biden after Harris dropped out, but initially Harris had the most billionaire donors in the 2020 cycle. The whole ousting of Bernie Sanders was a plot by these exact same people in 2020. And so help me understand what on earth makes her think that she has to have a reactionary perspective and just do the opposite of what this class does, even though, to your point, they do have an interest, it seems, genuinely in defeating Trump, even if they have a bigger interest in defeating a progressive.
Yes, and let me just say, I mean, that was one of the most shocking things for me when I watched her monologue is her trying to sell what you accurately described, Briahna, as a reactionary position as a progressive one, and doing that with this idea that, well, it's the elite who want him to drop out, so I'm not going to join them. I'm sorry, that is a completely bogus, and I have other choice words as well. It is a completely bogus argument. It's what you would call, a specious argument, meaning on the face of it, if you weren't thinking carefully, it might sound compelling or it might sound honest. But if you really examine the context, then you would realize it's complete BS. And if you remember, Briahna, she also talks about, and I want to talk about why she might, and she and Omar are doing this. But do you remember in the monologue, she also talks about, she criticizes the Congress members and other politicians and other Democratic Party operatives who are anonymously telling the media they want Biden to go, saying, have the courage. She said something like, wear it on your chest and say it publicly. She's trying to portray her public shilling of Biden as a courageous thing, and these anonymous people as they're such cowards that they're that they're, in the shadows, they're talking about it. I mean, this is such nonsense. I mean, obviously, I'm not advocating for those Democratic Party operatives and politicians. They have their own elite interests, why they want Biden to bow out, because they are worried that their party is going to get wiped out, because it's not just about the presidency. And also, it's about how badly Biden would get defeated if he's the candidate. So it's a question of whether he gets defeated narrowly or in a landslide. That matters, to the people who are looking pragmatically at the Democratic Party's interest, which, from their standpoint, from the standpoint of the ruling, that section of the ruling class, which is most of the U.S. ruling class, for them it is worrisome, because it's a question of whether Trump wins in a landslide, because it's a question of the reputation of the Democratic Party, and also it's a question of the down ballot races and the Senate and House. For them to not be able to hold on to either. I mean, that's a complete routing. The potential. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying that there is that potential, and that's what they're scared of, and that's why they're starting to act. But to portray herself as somehow more progressive than people who want Biden to go out is completely disingenuous and dishonest, because she doesn't have to listen to those political operatives or those Congress members. She should listen to the majority of the population who's saying Biden should go out, and who have been saying that we don't want Biden. We don't like Biden. We don't like Trump. We want something else. Why isn't she listening to them? Why didn't she advocate for a genuine primary process at the start of this year? Why didn't she do that?
That's the main point, because she goes on to say, she goes as far as to say that it's basically too late now to do anything, and that things would have been different if this were a year ago.
People want to have this conversation 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago. It's a very different landscape of logistics. Every single person, I shouldn't say every single person, I'm going to say in this class of people that you see coming out now, right? If you're an everyday person that has this opinion, I'm not coming for you. But this whole class of people who are coming with this other opinion now have supported the president the entire time. And many of those people are the same people who closed ranks around anybody who even wanted to raise this conversation a year ago. Fine. But we need to me, like, I'm looking at a lot of different things. And I want to communicate some things, even if you don't, particularly the case for even if you don't support the president continuing as the nominee on substance, merits, policy, etc. Let's take that aside, right?
Yeah, so but did you advocate for that? Of course not. You've been towing the Democratic Party line, and that's the whole problem. And just to that's disingenuous in so many ways. One, because you don't have to listen to operatives, listen to ordinary people, and the second is you didn't do anything to change this outcome. So how do you?
And in fact, it was a year ago. She said it's not a year ago. It's not a year. Literally, almost a year ago to the day, she endorsed Joe Biden at a moment that many of us said that's incredibly premature. Even if you think eventually it's going to come down to that, and because we have to defeat fascism or whatever, you're going to ultimately endorse Joe Biden. You, before the primary process had even begun, made your mark in the sand. So for her to then say after the fact that, sure, we should have just been having this conversation before, it is such a bald-faced misrepresentation of how things rolled out. It's really, frankly, insulting to the public, not even to mention the fact that 2 years ago, we had polls showing that 75% of the Democratic Party electorate did not want Joe Biden to be the nominee. And you still went forward and bear hugged him through this entire process.
Absolutely. And Bernie too. Remember, Bernie endorsed Biden within hours of Biden's announcing of his campaign for re-election. It's completely shameful. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's difficult to understand, I think, on the face of it, why she would do this and why Ilhan Omar would do this. But I think part of the fundamentals of what's going on here is the calculations you end up making when you are someone like the Squad, meaning if you ran on some sort of left program and you enter the Democratic Party, and then if you, for whatever reasons of naivety, if you didn't know that, and I can't even understand how you could not know that, but okay, you got elected as a Democrat, as a left candidate, and then you went to Washington, D.C., And it was like a punch in the face for you to understand how Washington, D.C. works. And then what do you do in the face of that understanding is the question. So what we have seen is the squad, and of course, I want to make sure it's what I'm saying is accurate in the sense that Rashida Tlaib did actually not join the railroad workers, sellout. She has spoken up against the war and so on. So, but just setting that aside, overall, the squad's performance has been completely abysmal, and they have their own string of selling out and betrayals. But this is the logic of the thinking, right? So you go to Washington, D.C., you think that, or into politics. It's not just about Washington, D.C. I'm sorry, Briahna, the same thing happens in any local election, local situation as well. A lot of people tell me, oh, you were able to do it because it was local. No, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I was attacked relentlessly, and working people who were fighting with me were attacked relentlessly by the Democratic Party, which was the entirety of the rest of the city council. So don't come and tell me that somehow local versus national is an argument. It's not. It's the Democratic Party versus what do you need to do as a working class fighter argument. And so when you enter politics with some naive ideas of what you're going to do, and then you are forced to confront the bitter reality that the establishment, the big business class, the capitalist class, the bourgeois, they control politics, then what's your conclusion from that? The conclusion they have made, unfortunately for tens of millions of people, is that they are going to somehow make peace with the Democratic Party. And I think their continued public support of Biden is some warped version, some warped way of some sort of, some sort of strange manifestation of that, where they don't want to go against some section of the Democratic Party elite. And that's the only way I can explain this to myself, because right now, nobody would blame her for coming out against Biden, in that sense, because everybody's saying Biden needs to be out. All the elite are saying Biden needs to be out. The New York Times and the Washington Post are saying Biden needs to be out. So she's not really going out on a limb in that sense.
And she could chart a different path, right? If she's worried about sort of echoing the concerns of elite donors, well, show that there is a different way to oppose Biden. Show that there's a way to oppose Biden by going more to the left instead of electing another centrist in his stead, a Gavin Newsom or even the Kamala Harris, who's going to continue its policies. Capture some of the energy, frankly, that's going to RFK Jr. and let people know that there are people on the left who similarly see their current concerns about corruption and the duopoly and say, well, and the alternative to RFK Jr., who also wants to continue this genocide in Gaza and who hasn't really demonstrated an understanding of what it takes to break the duopoly, here's Jill Stein. But they're not doing that. And frankly, I think that they are in part responsible for the continued right-wing shift of all of these disillusioned Obama to Trump voters going more and more to the right or finding people like RFK, because they don't use their platforms to say, yeah, you're right about what you're objecting to, but here's an alternative.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing, though, for us also, Briahna, and for your viewers, I think it's important for us to also recognize exactly what you're saying, which is that they are, just like we think that AOC should recognize the Democratic Party is never going to actually deliver for working people. And if she actually wants to fight for, or at least stand for the interests of working people, then that's a dead end, and she should support someone like Jill Stein. Similarly, I think it is important for us to recognize that AOC and the squad are never going to change. They are who they are. This is the this is the calculations they have made. They have decided that in the face of the complete stranglehold that the Democratic Party, the stranglehold that the elite have on the Democratic Party, this is the best they can do. And I think a lot of what she's doing now, a lot of what AOC and also Ilhan Omar are doing right now, can be explained by that video that she did. I think it was after the midterm results in 2022, where she said, the reason we didn't do force the vote. Oh, sorry, this was after the MAGA force the vote happened. Mm-hmm. She was asked, why did you do force the vote? And she said something along the lines of, you don't understand what it takes to go against the Democratic Party establishment. That it causes, and this is a quote, as you know, that it causes a relational harm. And so their calculations are that if you go against the Democratic establishment, they will come out to crush you. So it's better not to do this. It's better just to be safe and not do anything at all. And I think that is also why the defeat of Jamal Bowman is such a cautionary tale. And I know that it is about the redistricting and the APAC dollars, but that's the whole point. Who did the redistricting and brought the APAC dollars against Bowman? It was the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
For God's sake, so it's in other words, what is the lesson? The lesson here is that if you, as somewhat of a, having some version of working class representation, if you decide to even mildly challenge the Democratic Party, they will come to get you. That is the way it goes. And so the calculations that AOC and Omar have made, I think, especially in the wake of the Bowman defeat, is that better stay out of the line of fire. Let's keep the elite happy, and then let's try to get whatever crumbs we can get. Again, going back to their fundamental idea of, this is all we have on offer. We can't change a two-party system. We can't change capitalism. We can't change it away from capitalism. So we have to win whatever little bit we can here and there. But the reason I brought up Bowman is that it connects to what she was talking about in terms of relational harm, is that the Democratic Party, the way it works is that they are not going to punish you only if you are an out and out lefty fighter for the working class. Obviously, they will come after you and try to crush you if you did do that. But that's not what the squad have done in any way. They have brought a somewhat progressive program. They brought mostly progressive rhetoric to the table, and the Democratic Party has gone against them. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we should have our critique of AOC and the squad, and we absolutely need to, because otherwise we will make mistakes in the future again. But the overall lesson from this is that we cannot put any faith in the Democratic Party or the people who want to run in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I think it's incontrovertible at this point. A lot of people were very angry at Jimmy Dore after Force the Vote for coining the term fraud squad, for making this critique. It didn't matter how many of us made a similar critique or did it in, let's say, softer language, or even extended some benefit of the doubt, saying, all right, if she says in January of 2021 that she has a plan for the rest of the year, let's see how that unfolds. But all we saw was disappointment after disappointment, betrayal that you could see a mile away coming over Build Back Better. The railroad worker strike, over and over and over again, we were just validated. And I hope now that there's nobody in the audience remaining who still believes that there's any kind of good faith argument. And if you are, let me just point out a few arguments that she made in her remarks last night that hopefully dispel any idea that there's any rational perspective or any well-reasoned good faith reason why she would be continuing to defend Biden. At one point, she said, people aren't paying enough attention to Biden's assets, only his deficits. She pointed to the fact that he is strong among voters over 65 years old.
Whether you like it or not, you may think whatever you may think about it, Joe Biden kind of stomps with older people, electorally, which is one of the strongest and most consistent electorates. And it's actually a hard electorate for Democrats to win. Those are not people that are on Twitter, but they vote more consistently than almost any other bracket. So you take that off the table, you cannot assume that electorate transfers to any other candidate.
That he inched up a point or two among that demographic group. Of course, older voters are overrepresented, but that still represents a very small sliver of the overall electorate. In the 50 to 65 age group, Trump leads by 15 points.
Oh my God.
And as it's been reported widely, Biden is failing with the youth vote, being kind of unprecedented as a Democrat who has less youth support than Donald Trump. Not because Trump has a ton, but because a lot of youth are defecting to one of the independent candidates. She made the argument that this is also a risky proposition to shift Biden out off the ticket because of this whole Ohio state ballot issue. I don't know if you've been following any of that, Kshama.
The Democratic convention is in, 4 weeks or so? The state of Ohio has legal ballot access issues that require a name to be enrolled and certified on their ballot even before the convention. And that's not because of Democrats, that's because of Republicans. And to people, there are some people that quibble and they say, oh, well, that's not really true because they actually passed this other law that allows the deadline to change. That law that allowed that deadline to quote unquote change also gets enacted and enrolled something like 60 or 90 days after passage, which now puts us in a legal gray zone.
Basically, there was a filing date issue in Ohio. Ohio changed the rules so that the Democrats didn't have to have a virtual roll call, but they're choosing to do it anyway. And there was this back and forth between Jamie Harrison and reporters and pundits and other kinds of experts who've said you're absolutely wrong that we have to have Biden on the ticket because otherwise there could be some Republican tomfoolery that makes it so that he's not on the ballot at all in Ohio. I would point out what the polls in Ohio look like. Ohio is, of course, an all or nothing state with respect to the electoral vote. In a June 6th poll, which was the most recent one I could find, Trump is up 46 to Biden's 36% in Ohio. It seems unlikely that Biden's going to pull that one off regardless of whether or not he's on the ballot. Back in 2020, Trump beat Biden by 8 points in Ohio, and Trump also won Ohio by about 8 points in 2016 as well. So I don't know that we got to give Biden a chance to win in Ohio is a good enough reason to keep him on the ticket when he seems doomed to fail everywhere. And then she brought up this point about, well, what about all the fundraising that he's done? That money can't go to a new candidate. We had Jim Zogby of the DNC on a week or so ago, and I asked him about this, and he said, frankly, where there are lawyers, there's a way, and didn't seem to be especially concerned that money was a good justification to keep a likely loser on the ticket.
And are they? And is she actually claiming that? And I mean, in addition to all the excellent points you made and all the fact checking you did on the Ohio and ballot situation, and also Zogby's argument, is she actually claiming that if the Democratic Party got itself together enough to present a much more viable, vibrant, younger candidate, even if, like, this is a very low bar, let's be clear. We know we're not going to get any kind of a working class fighter here, but even if at least that low bar was fulfilled, is AOC claiming that the donors wouldn't come rushing again? I mean, look at another fact checking here, right? We know from recent numbers that 75% of the donations dried up, in terms of their Biden's estimate of how much they were going to raise in July. They raised only 25% of what they were supposed to raise. In other words, there's a whole section of these rich donors who are waiting, who want the Democratic Party to have a much more viable candidate, and then they will start donating. So if that's the fear, how is that even an argument? And fundamentally, of course, I think we have to keep going back to the point that she is not in any way speaking from the standpoint of working people. What do working people need here? Well, how big of a betrayal would it be of working people if you didn't lift a finger to try and defeat Trump?
100%.
I think it's and this also relates to Sean O'Brien's speech and everything. Sean O'Brien's speech was obviously, we already talked about it. But the other speech I would actually ask people to pay attention to is Eric Trump's speech. If you hear Eric Trump's speech, it is, I would call it, as a Marxist, I would call it classic right populism or right-wing populism, in the sense that it is peppered throughout with, and the way he gave the speech also with, all this sort of anger at the status quo, at the establishment, and my father will clean the swamp, all of that. Washington, D.C. is full of all these treacherous people, that sort of thing. And then talking about how working people, veterans, women, everyone was betrayed by Biden and the Democrats, and talking about the cost of living and it really and then at the same, that so it's right wing populism, obviously, as we know, is this kind of rhetoric that could appeal, deceptively, but appeal to working people. But then it comes with the side of just nauseating, grotesque, promised attacks against immigrants, against the LGBTQ community, and so on. And not to mention that the working class as a whole will be attacked. They keep talking about tax cuts. If you look at the facts, the Trump tax cuts have primarily and hugely benefited the top 5%, and in fact, much more disproportionately, the top 1% of the population. And the continuation of that is going to be even more disastrous for working people. There will be massive attacks on unions. Not that the Democrats have protected the union movement and so on. But my point is, what is in store for working people and oppressed communities under a Trump regime? I mean, Trump, in his own rambling hour-and-a-half speech, he promised that the Republican program the Republican platform, I think he said, is going to bring the biggest plan for deportations the country has ever seen. And they will try to carry some of this out. But again, we are in this situation because the Democrats have done nothing for working people. And that's why now you're seeing this battle between the more longstanding working people and the immigrant working people play out in cities like Chicago and New York, which is for me just to see that it's a tragic scenario that's unfolding, where working people are pit against working people because all of the establishment, including Trump, is selling them out.
And you would think that AOC, who really made her bones with abolish ICE and all of that, would be invested in getting someone in line who could possibly prevent Trump from being elected and enacting that articulated agenda. And yet instead she is, I forgot about these two, if you'll indulge me. She argued that part of what made Biden look so bad in the debate was that there was no audience.
He had the debate that he had. That debate had no people. There was no audience. It was like cameras and two pundits and the president and former President Trump. And then people went the next day and they saw that he did amazing the day he did a rally, I believe in North Carolina. And he did a rally the day after, and it went super, super well. And people were like, where was this Joe Biden? You have to understand, like, these people are human beings, and from what I assess, Joe Biden needs the energy of people around him.
Oh my God, I couldn't believe she said that. Oh my God, she's really scraping the bottom of the barrel for arguments for why
it's delusional. It was widely accepted and widely reported that the lack of an audience at that debate was intended to benefit Biden, because Donald Trump over and over and over again has demonstrated a showman's ability to play to the crowd, and who has frankly got more of a populist pitch than Biden, before we even get to the fact that Biden is breaking down in front of our eyes and decompensating at like a rate that would be tragic if he were anybody else and I had any sympathy in my body reserved for him.
And you sorry, just to I know you have another thing, but on your point, you saw the clips of him speaking at the NAACP annual event, where he had a teleprompter and he couldn't read. I think he screwed up the whole thing about the rent freeze.
Mm-hmm.
I know you say, Joe, you may not have a Congress. Well, guess what? You all told me I couldn't pass the Inflation Reduction Act. You all told me I couldn't face it. Anyway, we did it. We're going to bring rents down, as I said. We're going to build 2 million affordable homes and cap rent increases of 5% a year so corporate landlords can't God. Anyway, I don't want to get going. I'm going to get very upset. But there's gouging America. And by the way, not only saves lives, it will save taxpayers, just what I did on the first round on dealing with Medicare. It saves the taxpayer $160 billion. because they don't have to pay these exorbitant prices to these anyway.
Yeah, there was about a 50-second clip that, yes, it is cut down, right? Like but it's cut down from about a 3-minute segment of the speech in which I'd say 4 or 5 times he does the, well, anyway, that verbal tick of when he forgets what he's saying and he just switches the topic.
But which is incomprehensible, really, because he has a teleprompter in front of him. So why? And you're right. He said anyway at least 4 times, if not more. And he completely messed up the whole statistic of his own campaign promise, supposedly, which obviously he has no intention of carrying out ever.
Right.
The Democratic Party will never do this, unless they were really pushed by a working class movement. But basically, freezing rent increases at 5% or something like that. And he said $55, and then he got a huge round of applause. And then you can see him looking at the screen as if he himself understood he screwed up.
Right. 100%. The only last one I was going to bring up, and I know that you'll appreciate us talking about this a little bit too, is that AOC says, unlike the rest of us, I guess, she doesn't have the privilege to oppose Biden, that her community, unlike our presumptive communities, do not have the privilege of coming out and speaking against Biden in this moment.
What I will say is what upsets me is people saying we will lose. For me, I don't care who, to a certain extent, I don't care what name is on there. We are not losing. I don't know about you, but my community does not have the option to lose. My community does not have the luxury of accepting loss in July of an election year. Like, my people are the first ones deported. They're the first ones put in Rikers. They're the first ones whose families are killed by war. And this is horrific.
As though the people who are pushing for Biden to get off the ticket aren't doing so exactly because they feel vulnerable or would feel vulnerable under a Trump presidency.
I know, and this is such a tired and completely dishonest talking point from many of these so-called progressive Democrats. They keep saying we don't have the privilege to do this, and they, remember, they said this in 2016, and against Jill Stein, they said, oh, we don't have the privilege to support Jill Stein because we have to vote for Clinton against Trump. I think really the honest truth is that what she's probably thinking about is that she doesn't have the privilege, unlike us, because she is trying to curry favor with the Democratic Party. So in that sense, it's true. She doesn't have the privilege to stand up against the Democratic establishment because she is trying to endear herself to them. But the rest of us are not, obviously. And so we don't buy into this nonsense that somehow the impression she's trying to convey is, I think she's talking about Hispanic communities, people of color, women, take your pick. And she's also intentionally leaving it vague, but it's a standing argument, false standing argument that many of these so-called progressives use.
Yeah, and to that end, it was really funny. Somebody clipped and put on Twitter, there was a panel hosted by Rachel Maddow, and they brought up the fact that there's been a 31% drop in Black women planning to support Biden.
There was a poll out today, a poll of African-American women showing a 31-point drop in support from 2020 to 2024 in terms of plans to vote for President Biden.
Which goes obviously right against the core of this really perverse argument that there was a real primary and Black people said that they were all in with Biden. You got to trust Black women and respect Black women voters, even if that ignores the fact that a lot of people are rooting for a Black woman to be the one to replace Biden in Kamala Harris. Hey, YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.